It's time for the Tommy Sandhu podcast. Thank you, everybody, for joining us wherever you are around the world. I hope you guys have made an appointment to listen to this one in particular, because this is it's an unusual one, even for me. You know me. You know the nonsense that I normally talk about and I like to talk about. So this is kind of different, because I'm talking to Sathnam Sanghera. He wrote The Boy With The Topknot. That's how I famously heard about him, which is a great story, which got made into a TV show. Was it a TV or a film? It was a TV show, series as well, with The Boy With The Topknot. And my sisters and my family and everyone's talking about this Sathnam Sanghera story. And then I got to talk to him, which you're about to hear, about his brand new book, Empireland, all about how the British Empire influenced India. Now, I'm no historian, and I'm not that guy that can sit around at dinners and parties and spout off like what happened with the British and what happened at these battles, because I just don't know any of that. And I kind of get a bit nervous and shy when people are talking about all that stuff, because it's quite intimidating. Sathnam felt exactly the same way, which is why I started reading his book and why I was so excited to be able to speak to him at the Desi Blitz Literature Festival. So this is my chat with Sathnam about his book Empireland and about a whole load of stuff. You can't even cram it all into this one podcast. A whole load of stuff that happened in India with the British and the effect that it's had and how it affects today. This stuff's gonna blow your mind. Get ready. This is a big one, people. It's Sathnam Sanghera on the Tommy Sandhu podcast.
I'm amazed there's even this many people here, because it's so hard to find this venue. So well done. You've passed your first challenge. It took me 40 minutes to find this.
That's been your biggest concern so far.
Yeah, there's probably 20 people walking around in circles.
Okay, so all those people outside, they're all just wanting to be inside here talking about this.
I'm sure they would rather be here,
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. This is the Desi Blitz Literature Festival, and I am very excited to welcome Sathnam Sanghera, everyone. Come. This is, how are you, first of all? You well?
God, no one ever asked me that.
No, exactly, and I mean that. Like, how
I'm
are
okay,
you?
yeah. I haven't had COVID.
Good?
Yeah,
well,
so it's good.
But does that mean, are you awaiting it? Are you thinking,
yeah, I'm kind of feel like I should get it, because that's the best way to not get it.
Oh, you are so not on trend. You need to get... No, but so you've been well throughout it all?
Yeah.
Is lockdown a writer's dream?
Yeah, well, I finished my book.
Yeah, is that when it happened? So, and did you realise you kind of took it up a notch and knuckled down because it was lockdown?
Yeah, and actually my nieces moved in with me, so I literally couldn't watch the TV. I mean, one of them was sleeping on my sofa, so I did nothing but write my book.
And what a book it is. So it's complicated, isn't it? Empire.
Yeah, it is.
It's very complicated. And I think that's what I got from the fact that, well, firstly, what I thought was really nice was you were quite honest about how little you knew growing up. And I was a little bit...
Did you know more than me?
No, not at all. And if anything, you touch on it in the book when you say, whenever the subject is brought up of empire and colonialism, you kind of shy away from it, because everyone's got a counterpoint, and they seem to be a lot more vocal and pushy about their point. Yeah, but what about the railways, man? Is what you get all the time when you talk about empire. So, what did this book set out to do? Was it to educate yourself? Are you educating other people? Why do Empireland?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know about it, and I just think if you don't know about something, writing a book about it is a good way of finding out. So I've always felt slightly embarrassed that my history was so poor.
Yeah.
And I guess all my books are slightly disconnected in that I've written a memoir, a novel, and now a history book. But in a way, I think they've all been history books, because my memoir was a history of my family, the novel was a history of the Asian community in Britain, and this I've gone further back. So I think I've been slowly getting more interested in the past, which I think happens as you get older.
Yeah.
But I mainly wrote it because I went to Amritsar to make a documentary about Jallianwala Bagh and realised that the average man on the street knew more than I did about British Empire. And it was a bit weird, given I'm here. We're here, most of us. Most of you are brown, aren't you? Actually, there's not a single white person. Isn't that nice?
Oh,
Jonathan.
There you go, just for diversity.
Representing. How do you feel? How does it feel like being a minority?
as maybe Indian people should be very grateful for everything that the empire did for them. Shouldn't they be, Sathnam?
No. I mean, the thing I'm trying to change in this book is this. endless obsession with saying empire fills me with shame, empire fills me with pride. We look at the history, when we do look at it, through the prism of feeling, and I think that gets us nowhere. What happens is that we endlessly have the confrontation of empire in our debate about empire, because usually it's the children of the colonized saying it was terrible. It's the children of the colonizers, Jonathan, who think it was brilliant. I know you don't personally, but your people. And I think if you just have this black and white versus brown thing, you don't get anywhere. No. We should just seek to understand this very complicated history, and then we can move on.
Okay, and I'm not sure, and just on that note, how many people here in the room, or even listen to this wherever you are in the future, know about empire and what happened and how the British went about their business many years ago. But where can we kind of start? Do you want to explain the East India Company?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's many reasons why empire is very complicated and hard to understand. One is that it went on for a very long time, 400 to 500 years. The other thing is that no one can decide on anything. No one can decide on how long it went on. No one can decide on when it began. No one can decide on when it ended. Some people argue it still goes on. Some people even argue it never happened, which is a out there argument. But Enoch Powell was a fan of that argument. Yeah. What was your question again? East India Company. Yeah. And another complicating thing is that when it began, it wasn't actually the state that was behind it necessarily. There wasn't a central vision from, Queen Elizabeth or something. It was a bunch of companies. So you had the Royal Africa Company, and the most famous was the East India Company, which is quite a hard thing to get your head around because essentially it was a company. It had shareholders in Britain who owned shares of it, and it went out and did things commercially in India and in the Far East. But it had an army at one point twice the size of the British Army. Imagine if Google
or Amazon had an army.
Subway had an army. People would be like, "What the hell's going on here?" But that's what it was like. I mean, and it's quite hard to understand that because that's not the way I was taught history. I wasn't taught about companies having armies.
No.
So that's quite complicated.
It is, and there's so many points that the book raises and that get you thinking, and because we're all modern British Asian, mainly modern British Asian people living in the UK, you think about how the effects of empire affect today, and I think that's really what is at the heart of the story as well. Is at the heart of this little look back into history. Is that look at the effects that it's had today, and it's still interwoven into the way we live our life. I mean, again, in no particular order. I know one of the things you touched upon in 1860, you said in the book, it said that Indians were referred to with the N-word.
For quite a sustained period.
And weirdly, I got this kind of sort of sense of solidarity amongst racism with that, because I've been P-bashed over the years. We've been chased. I've been hidden over, in various random people's front gardens. As you get chased when a car goes past, you're playing in the street, the reverse lights come on and it's time to run.
That's just your uncle.
Yeah, exactly. My mum tracking me down. Oh, here she comes. Yeah, she'll beat me in public. Yeah, exactly. I don't know why she uses a racist language. No, but, just the fact that, we're all one, I suppose, or people of colour, we're seen in a similar way.
Yeah, I think there's a uniting common experience amongst the colonised. And actually, Paul Gilroy is this amazing black academic who argues that we shouldn't talk about the black community in America and the black community in Britain and the black community in Germany. We should talk about the black Atlantic because they're the same community, because they come from Africans taken into slavery, in the Caribbean, American, and there's something that unites their black experience. And I think there's something similar amongst the Indian diaspora and the Pakistani diaspora. And maybe there's something also we have in common as the descendants of the colonized.
Right. Are we supposed to I want to get this kind of clear first. Are we supposed to come away kind of go, Britain's terrible. The English were awful. There's apologies. There's compensation due. There's all these things. Or is this an eye opener? What was How am I supposed to feel now? Because if I'm honest, now that I've read it, I'm a bit like, oh crap, the world's terrible.
Well, I would say, don't focus on your feelings.
Okay.
It's not going to get you anywhere. All you got to do is try to understand it. I mean, the temptation thing. Oh my God, everything. let's look at the legacies, right? Some of them are brilliant. You know, people don't say this often on the left. Some of them are multiculturalism. The reason we're here is because they were there, you know? I think multiculturalism has not only benefited us, it's also benefited Britain. It's made it a more interesting nation. It's made it more economically rich and more interesting and better food, for sure, right? Also, I mean, the empire is the reason British people travel so much. You go to anywhere in the world, you'll see two things. One, a Sikh taxi driver, wherever you go. You're in New Zealand, or you meet a British person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The reason British people travel so much now, although they call themselves expats rather than immigrants, is, I think, because of empire, because we have a tradition of invading and traveling that goes back 500 years. But that is something that's not necessarily negative. I think it makes us global, makes us cosmopolitan. That's a good thing. And some things are just neutral. Some things are the English language.
Yeah.
Full of Indian words. The word loot, pajamas, dinghy, loads of Indian words. And that's not good or bad. That's just neutral. And obviously, within that, some absolutely terrible things happen. Genocides of the Tasmanians, massacres, exploitation, billions being taken out of India.
Trillions.
Trillions stealing of, you know, many of our museum artifacts. The word loot, you know, is an Indian word because we stole so much. It's a Hindi word, right? Lutana.
Yeah.
Lutana is
Yeah,
still...
Lutana, like Lutge, you know.
Yeah, Lutge, that's loot, right?
Yeah.
It's because the British stole so much. They even stole the word. But I don't think we need to think of it purely through feeling.
It's hard, though.
It's hard.
Separating the two, because you feel this amazing sense of injustice when you... Because, your book covers the time spans. We jump around a little bit in terms of time areas, and we look at what happened in the Caribbean, what happened in Africa. You touch on China, like you say, Tasmania and India. So this isn't just an Indian skewed thing or Indian Pakistani.
I'm not saying you
thing.
can't look at what happened in Tasmania and slavery and think, oh God, and subjugate your feelings. It's quite right to be outraged. But I'm just saying overall, you know, there's an idea that you can look at 600 years of history and review it like it's an album from Balisagoo or something, you know what I mean? I'm trying to think of Asian references.
Yeah, no, but, you know, yeah.
He's still making
music. He's still around, he's still making music,
right?
Yeah, but it's a 90s music reference.
Yeah,
but I know what you mean.
It's too big, it's too complicated. Yeah. So if you turn up and go, oh God, Empire was terrible, and then another person turns up, says, oh, Empire was brilliant, I feel so proud. Yeah. Where does that get us?
Right, and that's also something that you tackle earlier in the book, because you said there's so many counter-arguments, there's so much information that goes around about Empire, and also the use of language I found really interesting, because you talk about this, you say, you know, lootings and invasions described as expeditions, teams gathering, taking items and calling it cultural artifacts, when actually it was just straight up robbing, thieving.
Yeah, and the slavery is the best example, isn't it? Talk of plantation owners rather than, you know, slavers.
Yeah, and that's done to this day. If you were to go on a history tour of a plantation, that's how they'd refer to it. This is the servants' quarters in the plantation. You're like, no servants, they were slaves.
Yeah.
So there's still lots of change. It kind of needs to happen, I suppose. But again, I'm going to just touch on moments that kind of stood out for me, because up until reading your book, it was all about the Kohinoor for me. It was just like, oh, it's Kohinoor, yeah, that's what the British took. But it goes way beyond that. Grave robbing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy thing. I mean, I didn't realize how many human remains are in our museums. Loads, because in the 19th century, the British became very interested in racial science. I mean, they fetishized the Sikhs. Are you Sikh?
Yes.
Sikh. So they came up with this idea that Sikhs had physically exactly the right kind of body to fight. They published books explaining why we had the right physique. That's because we took their side, you know, after the Mutiny of 1857. And as part of that, you know, they took body parts. You know, when they often defeated kingdoms, they would chop off penises, hands, heads, keep them as mementos. And, you know, the British Museum has only 1% of its artifacts on display. They're you know, what they have in storage, you know, a significant part of it will be body parts and human remains. And they don't know what to do with them. And they don't even want them, but they're there.
but surely by bringing them to light now, will no doubt open.
Yeah, actually, I touched upon this subject for I'm making a Channel 4 documentary on this, and it's coming out in November. But yeah, it's really dark. I actually saw some of these things, and it's really once people realise what they've got, I think there's going to be intense anger in the Asian community, especially.
I can feel it kind of bubbling. But actually, when you talk about Sikhs being in favour like that, also in the book you touch upon, I think at one point the Bengali community were regarded as they're in the club, they're in the empire, and then they're like, nah, they're too effeminate, they're too weak, they're not strong enough. It's almost like it's like a little PR thing about a certain race that they treat.
It's divide and rule, isn't it? Everyone knows about divide and rule, right? It's the imperial way of running things. So they indulge certain communities. I live in London mainly, but I come here a lot. But there's a fountain in Regent's Park. If you ever go there, go and look at this fountain. And it's been built by a Parsi who, I think in 1876, wanted to thank the British for what they'd done to India. And he built a fountain. And it's there every day. I walk past it and I'm like, damn that fountain.
Yeah.
But it's good to understand it, right?
Yeah. There's so many... I've got a million things to talk about. There's so many things in there that enrage me, if I'm really honest. And I felt there were points where I closed the book and I was like, okay, because my mind will then go and relate those injustices to modern day injustices in my own little world. Guru Gobind Singh's Kalgi, the jewel in the turban, was taken. So was the Prophet Muhammad's relics.
Yeah.
This is the
thing.
That
yeah.
hurts.
Yeah, and this is what when Ranjit Singh, who was the emperor of the Sikh kingdom, I don't know if he called himself emperor, but he was the man in charge. His family were finally defeated. He was a very rich man. He had the Koh-i-Noor diamond. So the British, when they raided all his assets, all his jewels, his treasury, they obviously focused on the gold and the stuff that was really they could sell, but they didn't really think about the things that had emotional resonance. So he had Guru Gobind Singh's. Imagine if you had Guru Gobind Singh's Kalgi, what it would mean. For them, a worthless thing. For the Sikh community, also he had a relic, supposedly, of the Prophet Muhammad, which would have huge value for the Muslim community. And it was just lost because they didn't value it. And that's the point I'm trying to make about some of the artifacts in the museums. They're not even worth money to the British. Yeah. They're not even on display. They're just kept. And yet they mean so much to, the Aborigines in Australia who have lost a lot of their history because of the arrival of the British in Australia.
So politicians haven't done their bit, British politicians. You mentioned David Cameron. In reference to the Koh-i-Noor, he said, if you open the door to one, you open the door to all of them, kind of words to that effect. And I think he said something similar when he went over to India, and he said words along the lines of, I think, we need to get past what's happened and focus on the good.
I think he said that at Amritsar. Yeah.
Which, okay. And it's great, because what you do in this book is really, you present the information, but I don't know, where do you stand on that? And how do you feel when David Cameron said that?
Yeah, the one really good thing about the book has been that the people who've liked it haven't been of a one political bent. So it hasn't been, a lot of Tories have liked it. I think you could be conservative and absorb my argument, which is that we need to understand our history. It's not going to kill us to apologise for certain things. We can engage in giving some stuff back. It's probably at a time of Brexit where we're trying to establish new relationships with the world. It'd be quite good to give some stuff back. We've got a lot of stuff in our museums. And they're not going to be empty, which is what the phrase he used. He said the British Museum will be empty. It's like, mate, 1% of the collection is on display. Give a lot of it back. And also we have something now called 3D printing. I just think you can recreate a lot of these artifacts. Yeah. So you can go to the British Museum and still see some of these things, and you can give some of them back if they're big. And not everyone wants everything back. That's the other thing you need to remember. It's not like every artifact in the British Museum is disputed. It's only a small minority of them. And I think it'd be good for us to talk about it.
Is this what's coming then? Is there going to be a whole righting of wrongs? Is that what's due? Because people are talking about compensation. I think there's things you touch upon towards the end of the book in the States where they've got funds now set up or potentially set up to compensate people who have suffered because of slavery even generations ago.
Yeah, there's some really amazing stuff happening like that. There's apologies happening. There's a lot of regional museums, university museums returning stuff. There's individuals, families returning stuff, like the Benin bronzes. Black Lives Matter has created massive interest in this subject. And when I began writing it, it was quite an esoteric subject, but Black Lives Matter has made it really interesting for a lot of people. But I think we've got to remember that there's been a massive backlash as well, so mainly in Britain through our government, who've decided that anything woke is terrible. So they're threatening any museum that engages with woke activists that they'll withdraw funding. They're replacing lots of the trustees and the chairman. They're, Boris is regularly talking about, defending Winston Churchill's statue. Oliver Dowden, who I think has just got sacked, talked about, did he get sacked? Yeah, he talked about how he wanted to chain himself to the statue of Nelson in Trafalgar Square to protect it from the woke. No woke person is trying to tear that statue down. But a minister felt the need to say he was going to chain himself to it. I was like, mate, do it. Do it. I mean, stay up there. It's really high up, man. No one's trying to take it down. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to demonize those of us who are saying we need to change the way we talk about this stuff. But I think they're losing the argument because I think young people really care and the demographics are changing. And if you look at the surveys of British people, they're actually quite woke. I think something like 70% of British people, including in the Red Wall constituencies here, think children should be taught about colonialism and slavery. I think a similar number of people think immigration was a good thing. So I think they can do what they want. And I think it's basically a reaction amongst nationalists in the Tory party. And they're generally white men of a certain age. But I think society is changing and it's becoming more progressive and people want to find out about this stuff.
I have to ask you this because I want to make sure we are as balanced as we can be. But proud Brits will say, hey, you know what? This is unfair. Those were different times, and you're now Brit bashing. You're making the new generation pay a price for their forefathers. It's got nothing to do with us. Got nothing to do with Kevin in Canning Town, right? Who's living his life in East London. So, like you say, where does this go? What is this achieving? And are we not potentially creating more of a divide?
Well, the analogy I always use is therapy or marriage guidance. Say if Kevin and I were in a civil partnership, and we were having a problem in our relationship. We go to relate, to talk about the problems. I might find out some terrible things about Kevin. He might find out some terrible things about me. But that doesn't mean it's going to end the relationship. It might actually make you stronger. Just because you know terrible things about your family, just because your mum is terrible at cooking pizza, doesn't mean she's a terrible person. It doesn't mean your relationship is screwed. And I think it's an act of confidence to say, look, this is what happened in our history. Some of it was really fucked up, But I am confident enough in my Britishness to be able to look it in the eye and say, I'm still proud to be British. And actually, I think it makes you more patriotic to have the bravery to look at the history rather than just to be a jingoistic idiot who says he wants to chain himself to the statue of Nelson without knowing anything about Nelson.
I think there's something really key in that, which is the acceptance of imperfection in history, in our partners, in life, because we're so quick to say, you've done this, cancel culture, whatever you want to it's over. This can't work, or Britain's got to pay this. But actually what you're saying is, look, it wasn't perfect. There was lots of wrongs, but let's talk about it. Yeah,
and you've got to remember, it's not a uniquely British thing. British Empire was the biggest empire in human history, so we do have a particular problem. But I mean, look at the Sikh community. I have never met a single Sikh who said anything negative about the Sikh empire. Every Sikh is like, oh, we're so cosmopolitan. We celebrated Christmas and Eid. He was like Father Christmas. And it's like, I suspect it wasn't like that. It was an empire. There was violence involved. So I think there's a natural desire in all of us to think the best of our history and the people who came before us, our ancestors. Yeah. But it's a sign of strength to say, actually, it wasn't all perfect.
No. Yeah. You're a proud Brit.
Yeah, I am.
That comes across.
Does it? Yeah, lots of people don't think so.
No, I know. And it'd be very easy to sit here and kind of go, he's just, he's bashing Britain. But you actually, you say quite categorically, I am British. I have the right to talk about this, so I am. And I'm also of Indian heritage, so I am. And I think that's really healthy. That comes across. But did you want that? Was that important for you to get across?
Yeah, I am proud to be British, and it's just the 2012 Olympics were amazing, weren't they? Yeah. I mean, I feel like in a way Brexit happened in a reaction to that, but that Britain still exists, and there's cities in this country which are now majority minority. Leicester is minority white, Slough as well, I think. London in the next decade or so will be 40% BME. 44% of the medical staff of the NHS are BAME. I hate that phrase. Yeah. Black or Asian minority ethnic. Yeah. We're kind of part of Britain now, right? And I think that's to be celebrated.
Okay. I was going to ask this later because we're going to talk about some other examples in the book, but does multiculturalism work? Because you talk about, we are here because they were there. That's a common line. And this is... there's lots of people brought over for different reasons, whether it be people who are, from Africa or the Caribbean or from India or other places. But does this work now, or is the mess that we find, the Brexit mess that we find ourselves, all the dividing culture and community, is that as a result of empire?
Well, I know it's divisive. I've sent 2 tweets in the last 3 weeks. I'm trying to come off Twitter before my TV thing because my life's going to be a nightmare. And these 2 tweets both said the same thing. One was Emma Raducanu. Yep. I said she's an example of how Britain is really diverse and how immigration makes us richer culturally and financially. That's all I said. I think pretty average thing to say. Yeah. Last time I looked, he had 2 million impressions. Been trolled for 3 weeks now, or 2 weeks.
On what basis?
On the grounds that multiculturalism hasn't worked in many people's eyes. They talk about Muslim sex gangs. It's always Muslim sex gangs. They talk about, crimes committed by black people and so on. And so I know there's a loud minority of people who think it hasn't worked. But I look at Enoch Powell and what he said a few hundred yards away from here in 1969, a Rivers of Blood speech. He was wrong. There aren't rivers of blood flowing through Wolverhampton because his speech was about the Sikh community in Wolverhampton. We need to remember that. He was talking about me and my parents. And he was saying we were going to ruin Britain. You know what I mean? And we haven't, have we? I mean, no. There's Sikhs in the House of Lords, the House of Commons. I looked at the Sikhs in Britain Wikipedia entry, and the first line was, Sikhs in Britain are regarded as one of the most successful immigrant communities in the world. Yeah. Something like that. I was like, well, clearly Powell was wrong. Clearly there's some problems, but I think overall we, more than any other nation on earth almost, have made a success of multiculturalism. So
should we then be grateful in a weird way? Well, if you're saying it works, there's been opportunity, there's been a better life for many people of multicultural backgrounds who are now living in the UK. Should we weirdly be grateful for
we?
empire?
Do you mean we as brown people?
We as British, Asian, modern, this generation born here. Yeah. I know, and I'm going to touch upon all the harrowing details that went on through empire. Yeah. But have we got the best end of the deal?
Well, I get this a lot, and I address it in the book, and I'm sure everyone in this room has at some point been told by a white person to be grateful. Be grateful, because you could be you'd be
back in the villages.
Standing in the River Ganges, which I get every day of my life, or farming the fields of the Punjab. And my point is, I was born here. I'm British. I am allowed to observe negative things about this country as much as the average white man. And I don't have to demonstrate my gratitude unless you're going to tell everyone else to be grateful at the same time. As it happens, I'm really grateful, but I'm not going to pronounce my gratitude because I've been told to be grateful by a right-wing white person, right?
Yeah.
But I am grateful, and but I'm not going to be so in a performative way, Yeah. But I get that every day of my life. And so basically, I think people see a brown person observing dark things in British history. David Olusoga gets this as well. And they think, why is he bashing this country when he's got so much out of it? And they say, why aren't you saying that about my colleague David Aronovich, who's criticizing aspects of the country, or Hugo Rifkin, or anyone, or Melanie Phillips? They don't get it because they're white. Yeah. So it's a symptom of racism, I think.
And again, you touch on this, and honestly, I urge you all to read the book if you haven't done already, because you realise how subtle all those feelings that you're talking about, how we're not expected to be critical of this country because we should be grateful. How subtle that is, kind of all interwoven into society, and what's not taught in schools as well. And there's lots that you touch upon, I really, that you think that could be part of the curriculum. The first Indian MP in 1892 in Finsbury.
Yeah.
Why don't we know about this?
He had a very complicated name. That might be part of the reason.
Oh, okay, maybe that's it. Nobody can spell
But
it.
yeah, I always thought it was Keith Vaz or something, but it's not.
No.
1876, right?
Well, I've got it down as 1892 from your book.
To be honest, Keith Vaz probably was around then. But yeah, the first Bengali boy was born, I think, in 1616
Yeah.
in London.
And you wanted the book Bloody Foreigners. You want it on the curriculum.
So yeah, so we forget how this country has been created by immigration. You know, Queen Elizabeth I was complaining about there being too many black people in 1601, I think. You know, we've been here all the time. There were black people in Henry VIII's court, trumpeter famously, and the idea that we're this new arrival is a narrative I think we've absorbed as a community. I didn't realize that brown people were here, you know, in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, and that we didn't all just arrive in the 60s like my parents.
Yeah.
But I think the anti-immigrant narrative in this country has been so powerful that we as communities have absorbed it. And I didn't realize that the 1948 Nationality Act made every citizen of Empire a citizen of Britain. 500 million people were made citizens of Britain. It was a mad thing to do, but it still happened. The people on the Windrush came as British citizens. You know, lots of them didn't even have jobs. They just came because they thought they were allowed to come to the mother country, which they were. And now we're in a situation where they're being deported. And then we still talk about whether there's institutional racism in this country. I don't see white people being deported, you know.
From Australia.
Yeah.
Or, you know.
I don't see white people having their citizenship cancelled like Begum, you know. Yeah. So basically, if you're brown, you're still being treated differently, I think.
Isn't it amazing how much, you know, all those many years, hundreds of years ago, the Brits loved travelling. Canada, Australia, South Africa. It's incredibly really that they were so globally minded. And sorry, during this conversation, I want to celebrate that pioneerism that I suppose in Britain. But then we know that there's more to that.
Yeah.
But
the Native Americans weren't so impressed.
No, they weren't. But is there not a quality of Great Britain that should be admired?
Yeah, I mean, I refer to sort of the way we travel. It can be, there's something slightly colonial about it in the way that no British person is ever an immigrant. They're always an expat, right?
Yeah.
And also the way British people, when they're abroad, they generally just talk to other British people. They don't eat the food. They don't learn the language. They shout English at people until they understand.
And you talk about food poisoning as well. You say a lot of them suffer from Delhi belly or wherever.
Yeah, well, that happened. Yeah, and millions died whilst going to. So that those negative traditions continue. But also, there is a positive aspect to it. I mean, we are, and look at things like the British Council, which spreads the English language and love of Shakespeare across the world, and that's a good thing. You know, it doesn't need to be jingoistic. The problem is Boris Johnson famously made a speech where he took this as an example of why Britain was global Britain and was like, look, we've got Jeremy Clarkson and J.K. Rowling and all these people, isn't it? He made it sound like we were trying to invade the world again. I think it's soft power, that's what it is. It can be a powerful thing, but it doesn't need to be a way of dismissing other people.
Yeah. There's so many people that you mentioned. You touched on Boris Johnson there as well, but there's so many people that you mentioned, and you know, just to support the points as well. So, and there's a lot of references. So I can't imagine how extensive your reading and research and all that was, because there's almost as a quote every couple of lines or so, which is wonderful. And but he said there's almost so many sort of side books that could almost come off of this book. Who particularly got your interest in your research?
Yeah, and you could spend your life writing about this.
Yeah.
I might write another book. I haven't decided yet on this theme, because it's 500 years of history and covered a quarter of the planet.
Oh, what, the Empireland Strikes Back? Is that what you're going to do for part two?
Don't try to copyright that title, man.
I won't do.
I'm thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge subject. There are infinite amount of books you can read about it. But that's the problem. You know, I wanted to write a short book, crucially, because every book on empire is at least 900 pages long, you know, and they're very political. Some people are like, don't read that book, it's racist. Don't read that, it's Marxist. And it's hard to... What I wanted was Bill Bryson's Guide to Empire. And I think I wrote a poor version of that. But hopefully it's an accessible way into other books. Yeah. So there's great writers. William Dalrymple's amazing. Jan Morris, I disagree with her, but her narrative Empire is amazing. Jeremy Paxman's book's quite good, actually, on Empire. But hopefully we're going to see more and more brown people write on this subject, because it has been an area colonized, to use the apt word, by men of a certain age, wearing red trousers, and doing documentaries on BBC Two, getting off Indian trains.
Well, and how tired are you of the railways being celebrated by sort of old English actors?
Yeah. I mean, apparently they've just this week commissioned another series.
Oh, good.
It's like every white British presenter gets to a certain age, like 57, and as before they retire, they're given the opportunity to make a documentary about the Indian Railways and how they were great. Yeah. And I pitched one to a producer last year saying, I'll make one about the real story of the Indian Railways, about how they were built for the militaries, how they increased famine, and how they, made things even worse. They were built to quash unrest in India. And he was like, nah.
That's not going to work.
He said...
We've got Joanna Lumley. And she's gonna,
there's a queue of 20 men in red trousers who want to go first. But I hope one day we're ready to do that. I'm really scared about my documentary because it's quite... I've just never seen anything like that on TV.
Why are you scared about it? What?
I've never seen anything on TV saying we're racist as a country because we were willfully white supremacist for well over a century. I mean, you hear that point occasionally, but no one's made an hour-long documentary, a brown person, explaining why. And I just feel like you're going to have my back, man.
No, I've got your back. All right.
It's all of you. Okay. It's going to be a shit show.
Yeah.
It's going to be bad.
But that's actually, okay, you use the phrase shit show. Let's pick up on that, because it needs to be that before we move on, doesn't it? Because we're sort of tinkering around it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that racism thing is interesting because, a lot of our racism comes from the fact that we had a white supremacist empire. Even The Guardian was publishing editorials in the 1870s saying white people need to tell brown people what to do. Even The Guardian. So it was a culture that spread the whole of Britain. But at the same time, I think we've made a reasonable success of multiculturalism. Yeah. We did defeat the evil racist Germans. We did abolish slavery. But all of those narratives are more complicated. First of all, we didn't beat the evil racist Germans alone. The empire helped us defeat the evil racist Germans. Secondly, we abolished slavery, but the establishment resisted it for a long time, and we carried on taking slave-grown cotton from America for many decades, It wasn't like we suddenly stopped. The wealth of slavery still enriched us for a long time afterwards and before, and we also led slavery for quite a long time. So we can't forget that just because we abolished it. So my argument is there's nuance, but we do have to face the fact that we created a lot of the racist ideas that are now international.
You talk about Akbar the Great, which again I knew.
I forgot who he was.
Okay.
He was a Mughal emperor.
Mughal Empire lord, and he allowed the British to drink alcohol between 1560 and 1603 because he said they are born in wine, and to deprive them of it would be like depriving a fish of water. But again, these it's a very tolerant attitude from a Muslim Mughal empire lord, but it just shows, it shows that there was an acceptance of the Brits.
Yeah, and also what that time shows is how empire became it was different things at different times. So that time, the English were almost welcomed into India. Then they were very much not welcome. There was a time where English people married Indian women and were encouraged to do so. The East India Company would pay for the weddings sometimes. And then, in the Victorian times, when it became easier for white women to come to India, it became totally taboo to have an Indian wife, and you would lose your job if you married out of your race. There was a time where we, led slavery. There was a time we abolished slavery. We went around a world trying to abolish it in other places. So it was opposite things at different times.
And talking of which, tea. Tea was seen as imperial food. It was actually banned. Don't drink tea. That's theirs. And then now, tea's as precious as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of gin and tonics wouldn't be around. Pale ale is imperial creation.
Yeah.
Lots of things.
And Brexit. Okay, that's what. Sorry, I know this is a big one, but Brexit and empire, you believe, are linked.
Well, this is another reason I'm really nervous about the documentary, because I go into this, and it's the most poisonous subject in Britain, isn't it? I think people voted for Brexit for many, many different reasons, but I think one of them was empire, because I think there's a feeling that we were a superpower. You know, we ran a quarter of the planet, and then suddenly we're a member of this club where we're taking rules from the European Union, and it just never sat very well with us. And it's reflected in the fact that the politicians, Brexit politicians, use the language of colonialism. And, you know, Nigel Farage, in his victory speech on Brexit night, was talking about how this was Independence Day and we'd succeeded without firing a single shot. That's the language of empire, right? Global Britain, come on.
Yeah.
That's about empire. And so I do argue that, but in a way it's the least interesting thing, I think, in the book, just because I'm bored of talking about Brexit.
Yeah, true.
And also Wolverhampton, did Birmingham vote for Brexit? Yeah, Wolverhampton did. Well, actually, some of my family did. We've got to face up to the fact that many people in the Asian community voted for Brexit. It's hard to face up to that, but they did. And I think they had many different reasons, and they all came together in one unholy mess.
Yeah. And you touch upon that in the book, because you talk about the longevity of empire, the longevity of the effects of it. And we know with Brexit. And the effects of it seem to have a ripple effect for such a period of time that it's, again, woven its way into the very subtle corners of life. How do we untangle that, Sathnam?
I don't think you need to untangle it. It's like trying to get the egg out of a baked cake. You can't. Okay. It is who we are. There's a view amongst the left that, you know, anything tainted with empire, say, if you get an OBE, you've got to decline it because it means you're accepting empire. I think that's mad. If that's the case, I'm going to stop talking English. I'm going to start drinking gin and tonics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because all those things wouldn't exist because of empire. I'm going to have to denounce the millions of colonial subjects who fought in both world wars. I can't do that. So I think knowing this history makes me more British, you know, than before, because I realize how deep the connections are, and they go back centuries. So it's not like I didn't end my experience thinking, oh my God, I hate Britain. I went the other way. I was like, this is my history, man. British history is colonial history, and people are trying to deny that, and we need to get over it.
So just on that note, where do you stand on the taking down of statues that were linked to slavery or slave owners? If you're saying this is my Britain, do you accept the wrongs of the past, or do we start to change them?
Well, I did think about writing a chapter about statues because it became a big issue while I was writing the book. And there's a bloody statue in the cover. Yeah. And I wrote one, and then I was like, you know what? To be honest, I don't care. Because statues are street furniture. There's nothing more invisible than a bloody statue. The only thing more invisible than a statue is a plaque on a statue. Because sometimes they're like, let's rewrite the plaque. I just think it's interesting, the conversation they've inspired, but ultimately, I don't care what you do. Pull them down, put them up, whatever you want. I actually think we need to respond to them in an artistic way. All the things that made me interested is when artists have done stuff with them. So someone put boats around Colston statue to symbolize the slave ships. They've been redressing statues in Liverpool, colonial figures. But what I think they should do, you know, in Spain, they have this annual festival where they throw tomatoes.
Yeah, Tomatina Festival.
Yeah, they should do that, but for statues in Britain. So we throw tomatoes at our least favourite statues. I'll go to Clive in Whitehall.
Yeah, of course.
Pelt him with tomatoes.
Yeah.
Everyone feels great if you hate it. The statue's not pulled down. Don't get accused of deleting history.
No.
Maybe we get Oliver Dowden up the statue of Nelson with some tomatoes.
Yeah.
It'd be a great day, wouldn't it?
and a nice way of channeling your anger about the past as well.
Yeah.
Right. But but there is, like I say, the statues, actually, one of the things you say about it is you say, if the statues come down, you're not deleting history. Because people will argue, oh, you're trying to take away our history. You're like, no, it's not. The history still exists.
Yeah, the history of Hitler, Saddam Hussein still exists. People still talk about those things, even though statues were taken down. A statue is a representation of what one person thought about one historical figure at one time. That's all it is. Take it down, put it up, stick samosas all over it, do what you like. It doesn't matter. Everyone's too obsessed with this. It's become a culture war, hasn't it? Yeah. Where someone defined a culture war the other day, which I found very useful, because I think people use that phrase and don't really know what it means. No. It's any argument that is hijacked by people who want to have a proxy argument about whether we should have traditional values or progressive values. That's what it is. So statues is just being used for the arguments that are always going on between the progressives and the non-progressives.
Yeah.
And it can be statues, it can be the flag. We have a lot of arguments about the flag. It can be anything. So statues are this year's thing, right?
Tell us about wealth drain theory, because when you talk about wealth, it just made my blood boil. Because the first Indian to become a British MP said that between 1835 and 1872, Britain received the equivalent of £7.6 billion in today's money annually. How did that come about? Why did that come? What's going on there, and what are the effects?
It's incredibly complicated. Whatever in economics, you can argue anything. There's people who think actually Britain enriched India, but the statistics I think William Dalrymple uses is that the most damning one is that before the British came, India accounted for 25% of global GDP. By the time they ended, it was 3%. I mean, I'm not an economist, but that doesn't sound great.
No.
So, I mean, there's people who argue that a lot of the wealth taken out of India was just theft. But I don't think you can argue that, because some of it, as we've just talked about, had willing Indians involved in it, Parsis, Sikhs, might have done, some of the trade was legitimate. So you can't argue straightforward that Britain stole 77 trillion or whatever people say. It's too simplistic, I think. But you often hear those numbers. Yeah. I think the bigger the number, the more nervous you've got to be. It's better to look at individuals. You can look at Clive of India and say, by his own admission, he bought the equivalent of £700 million back from India, from a few short times in India. And that probably wasn't entirely legitimate. Yeah. It's a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah. In any day. I find that there's so many little eye-openers in the book as well. There's London was the home of the bullion trade, and yet we don't do any mining. So how does that work?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, because Britain was the superpower, it became the global centre for lots of things. This is where you came if you wanted to trade. And one of the reasons why the City of London is still internationally important is because we had an empire. One of the reasons why the City of London is treated differently to Birmingham is because of empire. Because the City of London has always existed since empire, to service empire, and it continues. So that's one of those weird, modern legacies you don't really think about. No. And lots of countries don't have that. Generally, the capital city is part of the nation, but our capital city is kind of separate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Square mile, anyway.
Yeah, that central part. There's some really horrific stories that you share and tell about things that happened, which is the bit that got me. You just can't even bear, it doesn't even bear thinking about. But I want to mention today, just so people understand what's in the book and where it goes. But racism on another level, guns with cows and pigs' blood on the bullets. Do you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, I mean, the British weren't very pleased by the Mutiny of 1857 when the Indians rebelled against the British rule. But the Sikhs took their side and some other communities did. And they took vicious revenge because, the Indians did murder a lot of British men, women, and children. But, the British responded by, razing entire villages to the ground, killing every man in certain villages. They devised these weird punishments and tortures. And the one I always remember is tying people to the end of a cannon, Indians, and blowing them to pieces. And what that does, it scatters their body parts over a large area, so they can't have funerals. So the families can't give them a proper funeral. So it's a way of punishing them in the afterlife. And the British did that. And I think because there was no footage then, there wasn't video, and a lot of stuff was repressed. And also it took months for news to arrive here. Yeah. That it was a long time before outrage emerged in Britain. It did eventually, but it was bad times.
There's a story of the Muslim man who was made to choke on pork. There's people defecating in other people's mouths and then taping their mouths shut.
Yeah, slavery, yeah.
This is the most horrible of things. So the book is, were you not nervous about it?
You've really sold it to them.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. But
by the way, are they going to get to ask questions?
Yeah, yes, they will get to ask questions. Sorry, but I want to get my stuff out of the way first. I really will. But how important was it for you to get that across?
Yeah, I found it quite difficult reading that stuff, man. And in the end, I started having nightmares about it, partly because it's lockdown, there's nothing else happening. And I set a rule where I wouldn't read anything about massacres after 2 p.m. because otherwise I'd have nightmares about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for historians and writers to look this in the eye. It's important for us to know and not sanitize it. And I was asked to write a children's version of this. And I thought about it. I was like, you know what? I can't tone it down because it's like toning down the Holocaust. We need to know what happened. And actually, it's not the best example because there have been some great children's books about the Holocaust. But I think most people over the age of 14 can read this.
Yeah.
And it's going to disturb them a bit. But overall, I think it'd be good for them.
Yeah. Just something I want to pick up on, again, towards the end of the book, you touch upon the caste system. And actually, because I see the caste system causing a lot of problems in modern day society, for particularly as a Sikh amongst our community. But you kind of touch upon the fact that the caste system may have been created by the Brits.
The Brits made it worse. So what they did, they came up with all these theories, the way they racialized and programmed the differences between the Sikhs and Hindus and so on. They did the same for the caste system. So the lines that were vaguely there, they made more clear and permanent. And now, there's this whole positive discrimination scheme in India to encourage, to give lower castes more opportunities. That's largely based on the British view of caste, which is much more extreme than what it actually was. And actually, I think in India, the most startling legacy is the police. The way Indian police demonstrations, that's colonial. The way they beat the crap out of anyone, that goes straight back to empire, because that's what that's what they're taught, and that's how they're being programmed.
Yeah. What's the phobia of cleverness about? When you say about, how is that linked to empire? Because you talk about a phobia of people being too bright. You half smiling as you say that.
Oh yeah, well, I'm not very bright, that's why. In the 19th century, there's a guy who hired for the colonial office who basically decided that the ideal type of British imperial servant had a third-class degree from Oxbridge. Not a first or second, because they might think too much about what they're doing. You want someone who's smart, but not smart, they're going to question the orders. Right. They just get things done. And I think that continues in modern life today. Like Boris. Yeah. He's actually someone very smart. He, for instance, can speak, I think, 3 other languages. But when he speaks French on camera, he uses this franglais, but he acts like he can't speak it. Because in this country, we don't trust people who are too clever. Right. Keir Starmer is seen as someone who's smarty pants. That's what Boris Johnson called him. And that is not good for him because we don't trust people who are too clever. That's my argument anyway. Okay.
So is that why you purposely said that, you didn't know too much about the subject? But okay, right.
Yeah,
very
reverse
clever,
psychology.
Mr. Sanghera. Okay, we're going to open this up to this. And again, I want to say, I've got hundreds more things that I could talk about. I really enjoyed the book.
Thanks,
and
man.
it educated me, it opened my eyes. I think it's changed me, but I'm still feeling the effects of it yet, and I'm working out how all of the messages, the lessons, the stories are now interwoven into my life and modern day life. So I know what I get from it, but I'd love to open it up to people here who would like to ask a question to Sathnam.
No one
Sanghera.
ever wants to ask the first question. Oh.
Jazz, go for it. Yeah, no, so you go for it to start. Yeah.
You both mentioned the word complex. It is complex. You mentioned Powell's speech at the Burton Hotel down the road in 68. My family lived in Wolverhampton, very close to where you were. Enoch Powell was their MP.
Yeah.
It's complex because they told me, they're quite old now, that Enoch Powell was, yes, on the face of it, rivers of blood. But behind the scenes, any issue with immigration, he was like the most helpful person. I find that hard to believe, but they told me that.
I had an extreme example of that in that, there was a famous turban dispute in Wolverhampton where a Sikh guy turned up for work with a turban, was fired, became a massive controversy, and he became a big campaigner. I met him, found him, he's in his 70s in Wolverhampton. Massive Enoch Powell fan. He said Enoch had helped him get his brother over from India, and he's been a conservative ever since. I find that amazing. But you're right, things are complex.
And then Boris Johnson, 4 of his children, I don't know how he's got, but 4 are half Sikh.
Yep.
And you mentioned about gratitude. Next Tuesday's World Gratitude Day. We'll get reminded again to do it. Be grateful. And I think as long as we have food banks in the country, throwing tomatoes at statues is probably not a good idea. We'll be the bad people. But
You can put them into compost afterwards.
Yeah.
Just looking forward, right? Because it's like, you like to say, taking an
China as well.
Yeah. Well, you're sitting there with like a bottle of a cup of Starbucks. You know, that is empire, is it to me?
Yeah, but yeah.
But are there lessons that America can learn? America can learn from what happened with the British Empire.
Yeah, there's a very good book about this called The New Age of Empire by a Birmingham academic, Kinder Andrews, and he argues that America and China are following the example of British Empire. China especially, because they're colonizing Africa, basically, aren't they, with money?
Yeah.
They have no soft power, do they, China? America, I mean, Tom Cruise was in town last week and everyone was loving it. That's
Yeah.
empire, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's complex.
Yeah, very complex. Anyone else? Yes, this side. Oh, sorry. I don't, oh, everyone's been all like, that's very British. No, you first. No, you first.
Actually, she can
Are
go.
Hamari bari aya.
You go first,
Get
'cause
some Indianness in you. Over this side.
I was interested in your views on Shashi Tharoor's writing.
Yeah, I mean,
You noticed, or you don't, I think in one of your earlier interviews that we watched, you didn't seem to think too highly of it, or do you have a different view?
I don't like criticizing people because historians, because I'm not one either. But I feel like, just talking generally, anyone who spends all their time saying empire was a brilliant thing, I'm suspicious of, because obviously it was more complex. And I feel like Sashi goes the other way a bit too much. Everything was bad. Everything. I think he finds time in the book to praise cricket. And I just don't, I think that's a dangerous way of looking at it. It's much more complex. I mean, I don't know enough about his book to be able to criticize it. It's done very well. I think it's made people realize a lot of things. But he's not a historian who does original research himself. So I wanted to make sure I used the historians who'd done the research. So when I talk about trains, I agree with him entirely, but I went to a train expert and who's not political to just talk about the Indian railways. And I feel like that's a healthier way of looking at things.
I think his views would come, he's not British, obviously, he's Indian MP as well, so do you think that would justify the way he portrays things? Or
Yeah, I don't think he's wrong. He just was the kind of historian I was looking to quote. Also, I respect what he's achieved. I mean, his book has been a massive bestseller, hasn't it? And also his videos talking about India have really made people... Yeah, I mean, hundreds of millions of views. So respect to that man, respect.
But you almost need a Shashi Tharoor to kind of come forth and do what he's done. And then you need a Sathnam Sanghera to kind of go, well, hang on a minute.
You want another one of me?
Yeah, well, no, I think there's if it's like those Russian dolls, there's one inside you who's yet to be born, who might even be in this room.
No,
who
we
knows?
definitely need more brown writers in this area. It's happening. I feel like people are really writing these books now. There's black and Asian, and there needs to be more women as well. Because I swear to God, I don't think there's very few female historians I refer to because there aren't many. It's such a male-dominated area.
That's because women are about the future. It's men caught up in the past. That's what we are. We're always riddled of the past. You were going to ask a question, sir, this side.
Yeah, a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned Jallianwala Bagh. Do you feel that the British should apologise for what happened?
Yep. And I don't understand why they haven't. Sadiq Khan has. But he has a connection to the Punjab through his family. I think it makes you stronger to apologise. And the weird thing is Britain has apologised for certain imperial things, like the Mau Mau. We had to pay compensation to what we did to the Kenyans, which is obscene. We apologised to the Irish as part of the Good Friday Agreement. I think Tony Blair apologised for the Great Potato Famine. So we have it within us. But yet when it comes to that event, I don't know what it is. I thought he was going to come that year. Finally, we're going to have an apology. And but I met MPs, Tory MPs, who were keen on it. Tom Tupknot was keen on an apology.
Isn't that going to open a can of worms and apologising? And you know, what if my dad slapped your dad? Why should I apologise to you?
Well, it matters now because people in India really care. We're trying to build a relationship with India financially and economically. It would be good for us. Also, we have apologised. I mean, the apologies about Ireland haven't opened a can of worms. It was a healing thing, and it could be the same in India.
Okay, question here at the front.
Sathnam, I read the book and I thoroughly enjoyed the previous conversation.
Oh, thanks, man.
I like one of the things that you mentioned earlier, but you haven't sort of said that there's so much reams and reams of what's written about the empire, and you haven't what I really like is that you haven't really, tried to solutionize it, and you try to explain the fact that today's multicultural issue can be solved using the debate of empire. But I like the concept of the only one solution I found in your whole book.
Was it statues? No, I didn't talk about that, did I?
Empire Day.
All right, yes.
Celebrating an Empire Day to sort of bring it into the curriculum, the national psyche, explaining that this is what Empire stood for, the good and the bad, and how that can sort of beam in, and then education and awareness and all of that brought in. I really do strongly believe that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I've rewritten the chapter for my paperback, and I make that point. And it's interesting, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, which was a massive racial scandal that happened, racist scandal, happened about 25 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it is now, yeah.
That report concluded we need to teach empire to understand why we're this country. The Windrush inquiry had exactly the same conclusion 25 years later, and we're still not teaching. The only compulsory history in this country is the Holocaust. Fair enough. But I think we need to make the teaching of empire compulsory, because it explains who we are. I think we endlessly have these racial scandals. It happens every 2 weeks. I know, because the Asian Network called me. Okay. They was like, oh, do you want to talk about this? And we have the same arguments. Yeah. And it's like, if people understood the history, the Windrush scandal wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be deporting black people, because it would be understood they were here because they were British citizens. But we endlessly have these circular arguments. It does my head in.
Multiculturalism can actually be a badge of honor. I mean, in the new Brexit era, you're looking for an identity. I think for every Briton, it could be a new identity, really. The whole element of multiculturalism and actually recognizing and being proud about it.
Yeah, I thought we got there with the 2012 Olympics, because that was a celebration of multiculturalism, but there's a huge backlash, Brexit and all that crap.
We are potentially on the cusp of some change then. It feels like things are bubbling up.
Well, the government are going the other way, but I feel like things are changing. The Welsh government have made Black history compulsory. Scottish government are consulting on it. I feel that, my book's already been taught by history teachers, because ultimately the government can't control everything. If you're part of an academy, you don't need to follow the national curriculum. If you're in a private school, you don't need to follow the national curriculum. And I feel that kids are saying to their history teachers, oh, tell me about empire, because they've watched Black Panther, they've heard, know about Black Lives Matter. They want to know, and history teachers don't know where to go, but they're finding ways, and I think things are changing, but it's not because of the government.
Okay. Any more questions from anyone out there? Yep, I'm going to go over here. Sorry.
Hello.
I really enjoyed the talk today. It was really good. As a teacher myself, so I teach English at secondary school in Birmingham. We do have a variety of kids in our school, so we do try to embed different texts, particularly with the younger year groups. So I'd say Key Stage 3, year 7 to 9. But what's one thing about empire that you think it's crucial for kids to know about?
Well, apart from the things, thank you for the work you do, because I feel like teachers like you are making a difference, and you're just doing it without any help from above. Apart from the basic fact that we're a multicultural society because we had a multicultural empire, and also we have institutional racism because this society grew out of the institution of empire. I think the other thing is they really need to realize is that history is argument. I didn't realize that until I wrote this book. I thought history was a solid thing, but it's argument. Yeah. The moment I think kids can cope with this. If you say to them, you know what, people really argue about empire. Some people think it's good and bad. Can we talk about why that's a stupid way of looking at history? I think they've got the sophistication to realize and cope with different points of view. The moment you have that, you can talk about the rest. And you can say how every single event there's different views, and they can make their own mind up. So I think there is a way through, but the problem is the governments we've had in recent history just want to put one view. So Michael Gove wanted kids to learn about the glories of empire. Jeremy Corbyn wanted to teach people about the crimes of empire. I think that is equally misled. We just need to understand it. And I think kids are much more sophisticated than they're given credit for. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
So what part of the empire should she take? Monday morning's lesson. We're looking for content here. What do we run the hour on? One thing, one part.
Well, the thing is, you can pick events. You could pick the Mutiny. It's hard to teach about the Mutiny, man. There's a lot of violence.
Yeah.
brutal violence. But I think it would change the way I see everything. You could teach Jallianwala Bagh. You can. Yeah, I talk about this in my book. I actually call it uprising. Yeah, the first war of independence. Yeah, I mean, again, that's a good way into it. You can say, look, different people call it different things.
Yeah.
Again, I think kids can handle that.
At the back.
What was the real purpose of you writing on this particular subject? Did you want to bring about some sort of change, or I mean, how did you?
Or are you just a troublemaker, Sathnam?
That's a good question, actually.
No, I'm only sorry.
It's a good question. Why do people write? I think ultimately writers write for different reasons. I wrote to understand it myself. I think I wrote my first book about my family as a way of sorting out my family problems. I did it for myself, and I did this one basically for myself. It's completely accidentally a bestseller. I mean, when I was explaining it to my friends, and I read out a bit at an event, not a family event, that'd be weird. It was a literary event, and there was just silence. I mean, my friends didn't understand what it was. They were, is this memoir? Is this history? What the hell is this? It only accidentally became timely because of Black Lives Matter. Suddenly, and statues, suddenly everyone's talking about this. Everyone wants to know. But I think as a writer, anyone who sets out to be popular or be a bestseller, it's not going to work out. You've got to write the thing that interests you. And then, by chance, you might find there's lots of other people who feel like you, but it's a complete accident.
Sorry, we'll go here first, and then I'll come to you at the back. Okay, so.
I think one of my friends asked you during the Black Lives Matter protest, and I was saying how it's good that we're talking more about empire, and in this case he was black, we were talking about slavery. You made a really interesting point that if we were talking about black history specifically, if we're only teaching people about slavery within black history, he said it makes black people always look weak, and that's not very empowering if we only teach the painful stuff. And that's what I'm thinking. The same thing with empires. A lot of people talk about the British Empire and obviously with India, how it's harmed Indians. But I think if we looked at, for example, you mentioned the Sikh Empire, I think it can actually be empowering to acknowledge the fact that everywhere has had empires historically. Otherwise, if we only teach about being oppressed and not ever being the oppressor, we're always depicting people as being dominated by others. Do you think that it's useful to also balance it and say, yeah, Sikhs have an empire, they have an empire as well?
Absolutely. And I say in the book that we need to celebrate brown figures through history, through British Empire. The abolition of slavery was led in large part, or by certainly a significant part, by former black slaves. But that's been forgotten. We just see as abolition as something that white people did out of the goodness of their heart. But actually, it was the hard work of several well-known black people in this country that helped change things. But you're right. And I think people like Peter Frankopan, who are writing world history from different perspectives, pointing out the West wasn't the first to do a lot of things, can really help. And Peter Frankopan has written, I think, a kid's version, a graphic version of his amazing book. But so I feel like there's a lot of work being done in this area, and you're right. We need more of that. But inevitably, our gaze is Western, isn't it? We tend to view things from the West, and it's definitely not the only way.
Final question at the back, then.
You said earlier that you've got the documentary series coming out, and it's going to be a shit show. Why do you still continue to push this conversation forward? What gives you the courage to keep going?
Thanks, man. By the way, shit show is not...
It's not going to be a shit show. There's just going to be a lot that comes off the back of it, and apologies for the language.
I don't want that on the press release. It's going to be a shit show.
Yeah, Channel 4, 9 p.m. It's a shit show. Why carry on? You know you're going to get a backlash. You know you're going to open Twitter. There's going to be people telling you you're this, that, and the other.
Yeah, it's been bad, to be honest. I've really struggled this year, if I'm honest. It's just the level of the abuse, letters. And the hardest point for me was when, I've been getting trolled every day, and The Guardian had written about how much racist abuse I've got. It became a story. And then I wrote something about wind farms for the Times, woke up at 8 a.m., and there was a load of racist comments about me from a reader on the Times. And I then had to report them. Then someone rang me and said, do you want this reader banned? Because they banned them. I was like, yeah. That took another hour. And I remember that quote from Toni Morrison is that the real purpose of racism is distraction. It's to stop you doing your work. My white colleagues aren't spending 2 hours of their bloody day having to deal with the racism. You know what I mean? And it does get to you. And I realize I've got to start saying that because it's just me, you know. And, you know, we make a TV program. There's 10 people involved. But in the end, I get all the racist abuse. So I'm saying to Channel 4, I want some backup, man.
Yeah.
Because they don't. They just leave you alone. It's hard. But I think ultimately, I mean, I carry on because I think it's really important. I feel that it's changing things in that people are teaching it. Kids are learning the things that I wish I had. So there's a real reason for it. Also, I think, I mean, as I get older, I get more religious. And I think there's something in Sikhism for me about fighting for justice. You know what I mean? Even when everyone gives you shit.
Yep.
I think my mum embodies that, and I get courage from that. I think it's our role to be unpopular sometimes, to be right.
Final thing, just before we're going to have to wrap up because of time. So go on then, hit me quickly. Go on in.
So you say you started off having little knowledge, built the knowledge, wrote the book, did the research, wrote the book. At which point did you think actually this is going to become quite divisive and I am going to become quite targeted? And maybe I should have just concentrated on writing a book about a Pakistani taxi driver from Birmingham.
Oh, God, I've met you before.
Yeah.
I talked about that book, didn't I? I never wrote it. Maybe I should have done. I knew from doing the Channel 4 documentary. No, that's when I really began, really. It was because anything you do on TV is crazier than anything you do in print. It's just... I think David Baddiel described it. It's just millions of people having the wrong idea of who you are, you know?
Magnified, yeah.
I was really surprised by the vicious hatred from the racists. But then there was quite a lot of hatred from the Sikh community as well, you know? And you can't control what people think, you know? And Sikhs are very argumentative. Have you noticed?
A couple of times.
They're really argumentative, man. And I think that's also a strength of the community, in that we don't really have a leadership, do we? Because we drag them down. Yeah. I guess as soon as you become a prominent Sikh, people are going to try to drag you down, which is fine with me. You know, history is argument. But it can get very personal and difficult sometimes. But I've taken Twitter off my phone.
There you go. That's healthy.
Maybe that's good.
Just to wrap this up, I'm going to say you compare yourself to a Brossette at one point, a fan of the boy band.
They're too young to know what I'm on about.
Well, there's enough in there to know. One of the Bros songs is "I Owe You Nothing." Do you remember that song? I owe you. Who owes who what?
Weirdly, I interviewed Bros in the middle of this book.
What?
I know, weird. My life's pretty weird.
Is that why the Bros reference in there?
Probably.
So, are we owed anything? Just final question.
What do you mean?
Are British, or even people of ethnicity, multicultural Brits, are they owed anything from Great Britain?
We owe it. Everyone in Britain owes it to ourselves to understand us, our history, right? And also, it can't just be brown people learning this. It needs to be everyone. You know what I mean? It's great that brown people are reading it. I want white people to. I don't want all the brown kids in the class to read it, which is what Penguin are giving away 15,000 copies. And I said, you can't just give a few copies. You need to give 30 copies so the whole class can read it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're recreating empire. A divide, right? And also you can read it as a white person. You don't, it's not about making you feel bad and feeling guilty. It's just about understanding shit.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Sathnam Sanghera, everybody.
Thank you.
Wait. Before you go, I need to ask you to make sure you have hit the subscribe button and you are listening to these podcasts regularly. So if they're on YouTube, if you're watching this now, lucky you get to see my face as well as hear the voice. Please do hit the bell button and hit the subscribe thing and get involved with the whole channel so you can stay up to date with what's going on. It really does make a difference for us. We then know where our subscribers are, the kind of episodes you're listening to, and then I can give you more of that kind of stuff, more of the good stuff. You want more good stuff? Hit subscribe to this podcast right now and follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Just go find the Tommy Sandhu podcast and welcome it into your life.